So, good evening, everyone.
Good evening.
Hello. And welcome to the People's Mayoral Forum, Getting Past the Politics, hosted by the Young Gifted and Black Coalition, brought to you by MovementFund.com, funding community. My name is Sagacious Livingston. My name is Dr. Sagacious Livingston. Single mom of 6, award-winning cover girl, orator, author of Infamous Mothers, and I will be your moderator this evening. The People's Mayoral Forum was inspired by requests from the community to dig deeper into candidate responses to uncover past actions, experience, and real plans. We hope we live up to this goal and ask that candidates aim to do the same in their responses. Questions were sourced from the community and narrowed to fit a limited time frame. All right, you all, here are the rules of engagement. Rule number 1, answers to questions will be 2 to 3 minutes. 1 30-second optional response per question per candidate. 1 30-second optional response per question per candidate. There will be lighter 30-second questions between 6 main questions that aim to get past the politics. Please respect the timing signaled by a yellow card for halftime and a red card, which means your time is up. Candidates are seated randomly, with each having an opportunity to answer first and last. Attendees may use note cards to write questions that may be selected at the end. There will be no closing statements. All right. So, what time is it open? 8. All right. So, we're going to start with the nearest candidate, and we're going to work our way down. Trying to get my time So you're going to manage the time for me? I don't have to do that part?
Yep. You just tell me.
Did you see I struggle with time?
Just tell me how much time they have, and I'll set it.
All right.
Okay.
All right. So 2.5 minutes. Here's the question. With Madison being one of the most racially disparate cities in the nation, what have you already done to mitigate those disparities? What are you doing now? What makes you qualified to implement racial equity practices as mayor? I'll ask the question again. With Madison being one of the most racially disparate cities in the nation, what have you already done to mitigate those disparities? What are you doing now? What makes you qualified to implement racial equity practices as mayor? Responses, 2.5 minutes.
All right, thank you. And thanks everybody for being here. I appreciate the spirit of the forum. So, real talk, right? My name's Satya-Rhodes Conway. I moved here about 20 years ago now. I come from a family where my mom was an artist when I was growing up, and one of the ways that she made money was to do trainings on anti-bias. We didn't call it racial equity then. Language has evolved. But I came up in that family, so I'm speaking to the qualifications part of the question. And I learned young about the systems of oppression and what structural and institutional racism and sexism and homophobia look like, and how it's incumbent on those of us that have privilege to push back on those systems any way we can. And I've tried to practice that, I think, imperfectly in my life, up through college, trying to work across coalition with queer folks and folks of color to fight back against homophobia and racism on campus. And trying to embody that in my life now. What I do for my day job is work at UW, where I run the Mayor's Innovation Project, the national learning network for mayors and their staff. And we focus on 3 core principles: equity, sustainability, and democracy. And when we talk about equity, we mean racial equity, and we also mean economic equity. So that's a core principle for everything that I do at work, and it's a core principle for everything that I would do as mayor. Let me talk a little bit more about here in Madison, though. One of the things that I've tried to focus on since I got involved in local politics was making it easier for other people to be involved in local politics, because I didn't have a great experience trying to break into the system. And that was really frustrating for me, so I've tried to open the door up for other folks who might not have the same networks or access to money or know how to run for office. And I've tried to specifically focus on women of color and queer women, opening up the doors for them.
Thank you, sagacious doctor. Thank you to all of you for coming out. My name is Mo Cheeks, and this question is why I'm running for mayor, for that matter. This has been my work as a member of the city council for the past 6 years, as a father of 2 young kids, as a minority business leader, and as an advocate for our schools. I got my start in sort of public service, so to speak, tutoring in our schools. And it was there that I started to really get a deep appreciation for how wide the gap is between the conversations that have historically happened at City Hall and the lived experience of the next generation in our city, the young people coming up in a city that's rapidly growing and rapidly diversifying. And so that's what led me to run for city council in the first place at the age of 28, recognizing but for the student district at the time that I was elected, no young people on the city council and no African-Americans on the city council. In the first year that I was on the city council, so there's a number of things to answer the question of what I've done. A few of them include passing the city's ban the box legislation and expanding that to impact all of our consultants, recognizing that questions of someone's criminal background have a disparate impact on communities of color, and that shouldn't be part of the job application process. In communication, in relationship to young people in my own district, so I represent the most diverse district in the city, represent from Allied Drive to Tacoma. Young people said, we need a park, and so I worked with young people to design what I would argue is one of the coolest parks in the city of Madison. And we passed paid family leave. That was something that I worked on and really led the initiative for. And that started with conversations with women in City Hall. And once we started digging into the research, it became abundantly clear that women, and particularly women of color, are disproportionately disadvantaged by not having a paid family leave policy. The city now has a paid family leave policy after my work on that. As I run, I could keep going on that, but as I run for mayor of Madison, my objective is to raise the bar for what it looks like and what it feels like to raise a family in Madison, specifically, particularly for families of color.
Tough crowd. I don't need 2.5 minutes, I'll make this quick. I'm Nick Hart, I'm a comedian. What have I already done to mitigate disparities? I'm a comedian. I like to get people, challenge people's thought processes and how they look at the world. What am I doing now? I'm up here on the ballot. I said in the very first forum, I was like, Madison really has to be honest with itself. If we're going to make any progress with racial equity, we have to be honest with ourselves and admit that this city is indeed racist. So, what makes me qualified to implement racial equity practices as mayor? I don't know.
I missed you. Thank you for being here, because you have been greatly missed. My name is Toriana Pettaway, and I am your Madison's next mayor as a write-in candidate. Make sure you get my name right on the ballot. It's not necessarily that you spell it right, but at least put it on the ballot February 19th. So, being the equity coordinator for the city of Madison, I'm going to speak to that last, but what have I done since I've lived in the city of Madison and also Whitewater? In the 26 years that I've lived here in the city of Madison, I've done a lot of things that makes me qualified to lead in the city of Madison. But not only have I done things in the city of Madison, I've also done things nationally. So let me start. What makes me qualified to lead? Right now, I just cast a vision for the city of Madison as the equity coordinator for the next 5 years, and all city departments has a little bit to do with what happens in the city of Madison and their policies and their procedures and their budget. That has to do with removing barriers and disparities in their equitable workforce plans and in their capital budgets. This is work that I've been doing for the last 3 years. Now, in the work that I've been doing in the city, I have led with our homeless populations as a homeless coordinator with 2 different churches when it was IHN, now the Road Home. I have dealt with populations that have had disparities, not just with transportation, but wraparound services and various realms of equitable housing, removing those barriers with Forward Corporation with the Emergency Assistance Program. I started their call center. And so when you think about emergency assistance, it covers everything, absolutely everything with people with low income needs. So when I talk about I'm ready to lead, I started that emergency program from the ground up out there in American Family Center. When I was at UW-Whitewater as a college student, I had 3 jobs as a single mom, and I was the affirmative action manager. So I've been doing this work for a very long time. Not only that, I've been with Fair Housing of Greater Madison for over 7 years doing this work. I do this work nationally with the Government Alliance of Racial Equity, teaching other people how to build municipalities and address these issues nationally. Sorry.
My name is Raj Shukla, and I got into this race for mayor because of what I think a lot of us have been feeling over the last several years. And that is that each one of us, on an individual level, in the institutions that we are a part of, in the communities that we're a part of, we have to do more to bring people together to take on some very, very big challenges that we're staring at. Climate change is one of them. Equity is another. A state and a federal government that does not always seem like they are our friends here in Madison. Now, I can talk about what I've done as the executive director of an organization. We have created a gender-neutral policy handbook. We've modernized our employment practices so that we're actually looking for people other than white men in a conservation organization, which, believe it or not, is actually kind of a big change. I can talk about what I've done as chair of a city committee where we've added women, we've added people of color to the roster of people that are making decisions on our environmental issues, but I don't think those are the things that qualify me to talk about racial equity. I'm the son of immigrants. I grew up in Waukesha County, Wisconsin. I believe I was one of the brown people in Waukesha as I was growing up. I learned how to straddle different communities, and I learned how to bring people together to take on very difficult issues at a young age. And I'm now the father of a child with a disability, a girl of color, a girl who is at constant threat of being marginalized, of being ignored, of being abused in our society. And I can only say that the qualification, I guess, that I bring to this, to implement racial equity practices in our community, and not just racial equity practices in our community, is that I have a lifetime of experience making sure that my own rights were respected and making sure that the rights of others around me have been respected. It's something I have devoted my life to and integrated into every part of my being. That's what qualifies me.
All right, you all. This might be the most serious question I pose tonight. You're walking toward a door and the person ahead of you decides to hold it open for you, but you're not quite close enough yet. Do you A, keep current pace, B, speed up so they're not holding the door too long. Or C, quickly change directions and act like you didn't see them. I'm judging you. What's the answer? Mo, you go first.
So I did this literally on the way over here. Apparently my answer is I speed up.
I'm from the South, so we hold the door for everybody, and if someone is holding the door for you, you speed up and act like you were raised right.
Ditto. I am from the South too, and chivalry is not dead. So I am going to speed up, and if it's a gentleman, I'm going to say thank you for holding the door and acknowledge his graceness.
Slow down for the laugh. Now, come on, I'd speed up.
Speed up unless it's an ice slick in front of me. It's too common these days. No, of course, you get there as soon as you can and say thanks and then hold the door for the next person.
All right, so you all have 2.5 minutes to answer this question. What are some of the city's internal barriers to implementing its change initiatives? What have you done about them in your current and previous roles, and what will you do about them as mayor?
Oh, is that on me? No. I love get to start with the easy one. Why is this some cities? Again, I think it's being honest with ourselves and seeing these barriers do exist. What have I done about them in my current previous roles? Nothing. I'm a comedian. What will I do about them as mayor? I got 2.5 minutes. We got 2 minutes left. You guys comfortable with silence? Bring them up and let's tackle it head on. That's what I would do as mayor, I think.
So this is a heavy question. In my current position as the equity coordinator, what are some of the city's internal barriers to implementing changes? I was hired as the equity coordinator to address barriers and inequities in the city of Madison, and what would I have done about these current and in my current and previous roles? Let me tell you something. Right now, I have had insubordination hearing, predetermination hearing, one after another since I've announced my candidacy for mayor. I'm hired to address institutional racism, patterns of oppression and things of that nature. But when I bring these things up about what's happening to individuals or in my racial equity analysis or recommendations, the problem is not from the bottom up, the problem is from the top down. And if I'm mayor, what I would do very swiftly is put in performance goals, measures, standards for leaders to be held accountable, so that when people are bringing things to their attention, that they are accountable. Because what the problem is, if we have 3-5 ordinances, which is harassment ordinances, and we have APMs, and we have standards and policies that are not kept, and other people are being violated, but they're not held accountable, then what is a system that is broke? If I'm held accountable and you're not held accountable because your mayor does not hold you accountable, then the system is ineffective. So under my leadership, and I'm faced with a little anger here because I'm being attacked right now for doing my job. That's my job, to call out the inequities and the barriers. That's why I'm running for mayor. And that's why you should vote for someone who's going to address it, because I know what the issues are, and not someone who doesn't know what the issues are. So under my leadership, I will address these issues. I will correct the wrongs. I will put the proper policies in place, because anyone else will get ate up alive, and I'm going to say that very truthfully.
It's my job to call out institutional patterns of oppression and racism because people's lives are at bay every day.
One of the most important things you can do leading, one of the most important roles you have when you lead an organization is set a tone in an organization. And I don't mean that in terms of, well, no, I do mean that in terms of, like, you set a tone for an organization. You set a culture around acknowledging the need for continuous improvement along a whole host of different areas. I think that's true in whatever industry you're in. I think that's true in whatever administration you're in, whatever agency you're a part of. Your role as an organization, certainly as a government agency, should be improving to meet the values of the community. I think one of the biggest barriers in our community and our city is inertia. One, just the resistance to change and the lack of a culture embracing change. And that is something that a mayor can do. In the way that they speak to their team, in the goals that they set, in the way that they hold folks accountable. What I would do as mayor is make it very clear that among the things that we will do is make progress on equity measures. Toriana talked about accountability, and that is an absolute basic thing in management. You have to ask your team to set the standards that you're going to meet and then hold folks accountable to meeting them. And that isn't an easy thing to do. It's very easy to let things slide when you don't want to deal with them. But in a culture that embraces change, in a culture that values making progress on some very difficult areas, it's absolutely vital that you at the top of the organization set a culture for continuous improvement.
So what are the barriers? One of my favorite mayors, the former mayor of New Haven, Connecticut, said once that America can be a great nation or it can be a racist nation, but it can't be both. I think the same thing is true of Madison. So one of the barriers are institutional racism in the city. The barriers are not acknowledging that we have a problem collectively and from the top. The barriers are folks that are hired to say yes instead of the truth, and a culture that wants yes instead of the truth, and that delivers retribution to people when they do tell the truth. And I saw that when I was on the council, and city employees would come to me and say, this is what happened to me in my department, and I'm facing this problem, and I'm worried about my job, and please don't use my name. And I tried to do what I could from the council, but there's not a lot of power there in terms of HR. So there's power in the mayor's office in terms of HR. So what do I do now? I build a team where I support people and help them build their capacities and encourage them to tell the truth to me, even if I don't want to hear it. And what would I do as mayor? Yes, I would form a team of folks from all walks of life all over the city who are hired to tell the truth and do the job, whether or not they think I'm doing the right thing or I want to hear it. I would set up structures that reward folks for working on racial equity, that's built into contracts for managers, and is part of what's expected. Right now, the city don't do performance evaluations. And so you don't get any feedback. And there's no way to hold people accountable for things like sustainability or equity. That's crazy. And I changed that. We have to build a culture in the city that's about supporting people, about building their capacity to do their jobs and to meet the goals that we have around race and equity and sustainability.
So the question of what's it going to take for things to change, it starts with showing up. starts with being here to listen. You see, most of us are here to listen and be a part of this dialogue. The City of Madison has, somebody said, inertia. The City of Madison has had the same leadership for the better part of 2 generations. And so when we talk about implementing change in order to change the direction, what we're talking about is what sort of new leadership is it going to take in order for our city to change direction? That's the undertone of this question. One of the things that we did, that I did while we were on the council, is pass a resolution to mandate the use of the Racial Equity Social Justice Initiative as part of the decision-making process. This has been transformative. There's certainly more that we need to do in order to implement it consistently, but bringing on a staff person to be able to lead that work is an important step along the way. Having a culture of transparency is going to be critical. As mayor, one of my first objectives is to end the culture that exists where folks feel the need to, we're in a polite audience, cover their butts all of the time and argue over data. We have to get past this arguing over the data that happens right now. Those of us who are here know that the tale of 2 cities are real, that Madison is a place that is one of the best cities to raise a family and one of the worst cities to raise a family, depending on the color of your skin. We have reports within City Hall that that's true within City Hall as well. That communities of color, there was the MAX study a couple of years ago, that employees of color disproportionately feel targeted, disproportionately feel that that they lack opportunity for upward mobility within City Hall. That's unacceptable, and as mayor, I will end that. We have to be discontent with this reality. If we're going to make progress, not only in City Hall, but as a community, all of us need to become discontent with the status quo.
All right, you all, just to remind the panelists that you all do have an optional 30-second response. One question, one response. So, yes.
Sure. Thank you, Mo, for passing a requirement to use the Racial Equity and Social Justice Toolkit. Thank you, Toriana, for being someone who is tasked with doing a Herculean job in a giant bureaucracy. I chair a city committee. Never once has anybody from the city come to my committee and taught us about the Racial Equity and Social Justice Toolkit without us asking for it, without us demanding that it happen, without us writing it into pieces of legislation that we've written. That is what setting a culture is about, and that is the importance of new leadership in the city.
Yes, Toriana?
So in my 5-year vision, that is in my vision to do that, to go to all boards, committees, and commissions. Right. Because I am a staff of 1 with 1 assistant, and so I have been asking very consistently in the 3 years that I have been employed to have staff that is not volunteer. I have a team of indirect reports, and every year I get told I can't ask for budget for staff. So moving forward, I and my team put forward the resolution to train 174 people on the racial equity analysis that Mo is talking about. I did that with my team of 30. So be clear about that on how to use the racial equity analysis. Thank you. Woo!
All right. Another serious question. Where were you when YGB hit the scene? Yes.
I remember distinctly watching videos of Everett Mitchell speaking to folks from all backgrounds in this community who had assembled to protest what had happened with Tony Robinson's killing in this community, and I was inspired. And I was inspired by him, certainly, but I was inspired by the collective spirit in this community who took to the streets and made sure that people heard their voices.
Yeah, I think my first introduction was a panel at UW when Everett and Em were talking about community control of police. And feeling like, wow, that's really interesting, and good Lord, is Em smart. And I want to know more. And I want to learn from these people. And just the analysis was so impressive, and so I've been watching and learning ever since.
I don't remember the first day that we were out. I was only at, I think, 1 or 2 of the early marches, but the first day that I really started to meet folks was at Tony Robinson's funeral. I went to that funeral as an alder, as a young black man living in a city where we thought this would never happen. I'm sorry, man. And, oh, we're out of time? I didn't even know those were 2-minute ones. My bad. Anyway.
When I ran in 2011, I had a platform that was having more community policing, and I said it in the other forums, like, to have the police department operate more like the fire department rather than patrolling, that we wouldn't have children who are having a bad trip on some psychedelics getting murdered by police. Yeah.
I was at CUNA Mutual when community leaders received the phone call from the police that evening, and I remember Michael Johnson and Colleen Kerr and others. I was there when the phone call came in from Cobalt and the leaders asking the Black leaders how to address this issue. And that's when I was a part of Justified Anger as the project manager. And I remember that. And it was just very surreal.
All right, so here's a 2-part question, 3 minutes. And I think, Ms. Pettaway, I think I skipped you last time once the Raj started.
Oh, okay, well, come on.
All right. So the 2-part question. Do you support the city's policy of putting MPD cops in the 4 main high schools in exchange for money from MMSD? And why? If no, will you use the mayor's power to veto the contract between the city and MMSD? If it is approved by the Common Council, will you use the mayor's power as head of the police department to order the chief of police to remove the cops from the schools? And then, here's part 2. How do you plan to address incarceration and the racial disparities that exist there? Woo!
I should say youth incarceration.
So I actually
Youth
have,
incarceration, I'm sorry, I apologize. This should say, how do you plan to address youth incarceration and the racial disparities that exist there?
I'm going to give my disclaimer first as the equity coordinator who worked very closely with the Madison Police Department. I firmly believe that our police department is a good police department, and bias exists in everyone. But I do not believe in having police officers in our schools. I just don't. Let me tell you why. Our Black and brown kids and our kids who are othered and who have to experience going to prisons or jails or reentry places, those kids are oftentimes traumatized by having to see their family members or their relatives in detention centers or prisons. So why would you have police officers in schools to have them socialize and have that become a normative?
children should not have that be an experience as a normative. As much as possible, what my solution would be as a mayor moving forward and leading is like, let's, for instance, imagine a world where employers, in collaboration, both in my leadership, we have maybe 20 hours a month where our employees can volunteer in the schools, and we work with community partners where we promote volunteerism in the school so that we have more families, more individuals in the school working in collaborations with teachers who are already overtaxed, overworked. Now to the second part of that, kids coming out of juvenile corrections, we see high volunteerism in corrections while they're there. But when those kids get out, they don't see those people coming to mentor them and volunteer with them. One of the things that I would do is take my Wonderful More program that I already have kids every year, that I get every year, but those kids are targeted kids. These are kids who are not absolutely doing the worst in school. But what I would do is I would take my same program that I work in, it's the mayor's program, but I get kids. I would actually re-enter these kids into career opportunities and mentoring opportunities, workforce equity, and pair them with jobs. Something to look forward to, skill building, vocational opportunities. Kids want to have a sense of belonging. They want to have something to belong to. They want mentorship. They want opportunities. We need to redirect them, refocus them with wraparound services, and also wraparound services with their families. Partner with the school district doing exactly the same. Individual plans of care. School need to also be part of this process because that's what's missing. Education don't always speak to every kid when you're being taught that. So they need individual plans of care in the classroom. The Shabazz program is actually a really good program because it meets kids' needs where they are. So we really need to start focusing on where kids are, and that's what I would do in my leadership.
So I come at this issue as the father of 3 daughters, as the father of a daughter who is both uniquely dependent on the police as a kid with a disability and who is uniquely vulnerable to the police as a person with a disability. I do not support putting police in the 4 main high schools, personally. There isn't any evidence to suggest that that actually increases the safety of young people in high schools. I will not use a veto pen to stop that contract if the council approves it. And I'll tell you why. There is also an elected body called the school board that has requested these services. It's a school board that is responsive to union employees who feel like their safety is being threatened for whatever reason. It is very difficult for me to envision feeling it is justified to override the opinion of the school board, override the opinion of the employees who have asked for it, override the opinion of the common council who would have approved that, that doesn't feel like the right move for me. I would insist that there is justification and that there is proof that this isn't having the detrimental effects that so many of us fear rightly. So, will you use the mayor's power as a head of the police department to order the chief of police to remove the cops from the schools? No, I won't. How do you plan to address your youth incarceration and the racial disparities that exist there? I would like to head off the disparities before they begin. I would like to use my term in office to focus on birth to 3 care, early childhood care for young people and their families, making sure that young people at the most formative point of brain development for them are receiving the types of nutrition assistance, literacy assistance that they need, and that their families receive the kinds of assistance they need to find jobs and to stabilize their home environments. That also includes making sure that there's affordable housing. That also includes making sure there's a transportation system that works. But we can't simply just react to disparities at the end of the problem. We have to fix the problem before it even happens.
So we have to end the school to prison pipeline. And part of that means not having cops in schools. And So, no, I don't support that. But we have to find other ways to make people feel safe in schools or anywhere. So think about, how do we practice restorative justice in our schools? Think about, can we pay elders from the community to come in to the schools and help be part of a safety solution? How do we get folks that kids respect to be part of a solution? I don't know. And it's, frankly, I don't think I should be the one to dictate those answers. I think that should be something that we develop with the community, and most importantly, with the kids who are impacted, and listen to their voices and what they think would make their lives more safe. And yes, we need to be, working on opportunity and mentorship and programs and first degree and, the whole list of things, of course, all of that. But it's got to start with the kids. It's got to start with the people who are most impacted and the communities that are most impacted, and be led by those folks, and not led from City Hall or from a nonprofit organization that got a contract, or, it needs to be in cooperation with the community. Otherwise, it's, whatever we come up with is probably not going to work. So we got to be empowering folks in community. And, real talk, that's not easy, but it's worth doing. And we got to find a way to do it better in this community, so that we're really listening to each other, and that we are allowing the communities that are most impacted by these issues to be heard in City Hall, and to have a hand in designing responses to issues like cops in schools or youth incarceration or whatever the issue is.
So everyone deserves to feel safe in their school and in their community, in their neighborhood. As an alder representing, as I said earlier, the most diverse district in our city, socioeconomically, as well as probably racially, I have been a part of this discussion for years now, as the school district has repeatedly made the decision that they want to keep police officers in the schools. I believe, as mayor, I believe that we need to have a plan for how we get police officers out of schools. I think we should have and that should be an agenda. We're not going to do it overnight. One of the things that we are going to do when I'm mayor, the school district has made it clear that they want to have a say in who is an appropriate ERO in their school district. And there was some hullabaloo about whether or not the chief of police would agree with that. As mayor, I'd certainly agree with that. Of course, the schools should have a say in whether or not an ERO is a good fit for the school building. But we also, as mayor, I'll lead our community in a path towards increasing safety writ large in our schools, with trying to get rid of police officers. On the question of what are we going to do to address youth disparities, so plenty has been talked about in terms of the supports that young people need in our community. We recognize that too many young people feel disengaged, feel disconnected, feel hopeless. I mentioned, I got my start in this work of service, so to speak, as a tutor in the schools. And walking down the halls of Memorial, you could see in kids' eyes, kids with hope and kids without hope. I remember a couple summers ago when we had a number of shootings in a row. I'm talking to a detective. We've got this board, a bunch of faces of black men. And detective says, man, I got papers back on my desk from 15 years ago when these folks were teenagers. We knew they were on this path. We always knew it. And as a community, we didn't do enough to raise the bar for their expectations for life. And so as mayor, one of the things I'm going to establish is an evidence-based cradle-to-career program so that we have a path to success starting that include mentorship and internships for all kids that want them, but starts at an early age, setting a high bar for the genius of all of our kids. When I'm mayor, we're going to establish a program so that every kindergartner has a college savings account, because we know there's great research that shows that regardless of a kid's background, having a college savings account at a young age is transformative to your self-identity. As a community, I want to live in a place where we set a high bar for all of our kids. That's why I'm running for mayor.
So we have Nick, and then we're gonna do.
Oh, I don't know if I'm going to answer that question better than anybody up here. I do not think police should be in the schools. There's a better way of policing. Again, with the community policing, having them operate like the fire department where they're in actual service instead of law enforcement, and getting them out of the schools and having them not patrol. I don't know if it's possible. I mean, just an idea is if they're operating like the fire department, they're not patrolling. We take money from fuel saved and put it towards the schools. But it may be too simple. I don't know.
30 seconds response, Ms. Toriana.
So one of the things that I do in my spare time is, as a mom of 2 kids that are in the Madison School District, I am on several school boards, and I'm on the parent, Dr. Cheatham's superintendent advisory board, and I've been on that for 6 years, for Midfield and Lincoln. And one of the biggest things that come out of that board, we constantly have the conversation of cops in the school or police officers in the school. And overwhelmingly, the conversation always comes back is that they do not want police officers in the school.
Any more responses?
So just to add on, one of the things that we know that teachers are craving, and that hopefully with the new governor we'll be able to actually deliver, we need more mental health support services in our schools for teachers and for students, for young people. Because too many of us in our community are dealing with stuff, and we have not made a sufficient enough commitment in this community to walking alongside each other. And really putting that support funding into mental health support services. That starts in our schools.
Yep.
Any more responses? All right. The People's Mayoral Forum is brought to you by MovementFund.com. Movement Fund is a crowdsourced tool to build funding for low-barrier grants that support social good work that may fall outside of the usually supported criteria. Grants focus on key areas including meeting needs, building awareness, advocacy, and action. Movement Fund rewards community partners that help build a network of dedicated monthly contributors who support more grants. As a result, community partners and volunteers can generate revenues that they can choose to donate back to the fund or improve their bottom line when they join the movement and share the opportunity to contribute. Learn more about Movement Fund and join the movement at movementfund.com. All right, you all. What is your plan to increase access to high-quality early childhood education? What is your plan to increase access to high-quality early childhood education? 2 minutes. And how do I pronounce it? Is it Satya?
Satya.
Satya.
All right. Well, so this is a critical priority, right? This is where it starts. And it's got to be in partnership, right? We need to be working with the school district, we need to be working with UW, and we need to be working with libraries and community centers and frankly anybody we can bring to the table, because it's not early childhood, and I'm going to go beyond education, right? Care and education and services, I think that all goes together, isn't an issue that any one government institution has responsibility for. So it's going to take partnerships to get it done, and it's going to take funding. to get it done. But I think that what's probably most important is making sure that we're locating services in communities so they're really accessible to folks if you don't have a car, so by transit or other modes, to make sure that the services are culturally competent and language accessible, and probably need to be trauma informed. I actually think that all the services the city funds ought to be trauma informed, and we should be insisting on a high standard of training there. But the most important thing, I think, is that we spread services out across the community so they're really accessible to folks. And that's going to take, again, it's going to take partnerships and it's going to take funding. And that means that we're going to need to prioritize it as a community in addition to prioritizing it as a city.
So early childhood education is a justice issue. It is a dignity issue. It's also an economic development issue, right? We know that families need to have access to affordable early childhood care so that they can go to work, so that they can afford to maybe change jobs, right? When a parent is making life decisions, early childhood education is one of the very first decisions you're thinking about how you can make, right? And so our city, frankly, has had a commitment to setting up bar for high quality education and sort of acknowledging that. But as mayor, in order for us to really advance that, we're going to have to invest in public-private partnerships that are going to help reduce the cost of early childhood education. We need to be encouraging employers to prioritize early childhood education and access to it as something for the workforce. And one of the things that I'm going to be a champion of as mayor is so some of you may know our school district is very likely going to be going to referendum in the next few years because our schools are getting old, and relative to surrounding communities, when somebody's looking at this community, when they're thinking about moving here or choosing where they're going to live, they're evaluating the schools, and just the look and feel of it is part of it. As mayor, I'm going to be an advocate that we absolutely should pass a referendum to improve the quality of our schools, and where it's possible, where the city has a role to play, I think the city should step up and augment these buildings with things like public health clinics or early childhood care facilities. If we're going to be building new buildings, there's an opportunity to take advantage of those costs, those investments, and ensure that we're building affordable early child care.
I don't have any kids. I know that's not your answer, but I haven't even really had to think about this. So it's well, I planned it. I really think we need to look at the reallocation of funds with this city. I mean, if the police department's getting, I don't even know what the number, you guys know what the number is? 20% of what? What's the budget? How much? A couple $100 million? You can't get, reallocate funds of the $200 million from the police department. There you go. Put it towards that. I don't have a good answer.
Was that, as mayor, I want to make sure it's stated that as a mayor, what we are able to do in the area of high quality early childhood education, our scope and our RAM in the planning department and our CDD department is kind of limited in scope. So we have a huge part, however, in the Young Star rating and in our funds that we have a program where communities
or individuals, families can actually get funding for childcare, so that they get childcare, to pay for childcare. And so one of the things that I would do, there are two different things that we do. We have some role in certification of daycares, and we have some role in families who are low income to get city funds to be able to pay for childcare. What I would do is I would increase those funds for families to receive childcare, and that would directly impact their ability to be employed and have transportation and housing. Right now, the threshold is very low, so you have to be very low income. I would really focus on changing the resolution so that we can increase the threshold for that, because based on the HUD standards, that's what it's based off of, so we really need to do some things to really change that. The Young Star rating is one of the other things where daycares get certified based off of the quality of care that's provided in the daycares. So those are other things that we can do. So we need to partner with existing daycares like one city who has that 0 to 3, that early education. That's a wonderful model that is childcare competent for people of color. If we're going to address disparities in the community, let's invest in communities that are already addressing racial disparities in the community. Now let's talk about a different level. A different level is where we have lack of funding for people of color who are trying to get grants to start these types of businesses. There you go.
So most of what a city does is, what a city actually does is infrastructure. It's making sure streets are cleaned in the winter. It's making sure that public safety is is maintained, whether through the police or the fire departments. It's making sure our buildings are safe. It's making sure that we can have a functioning economy. One of the things it doesn't do is one of the things that the school system also doesn't do. It doesn't focus on early childhood care. There's this big gap in services that no one's really providing for. We have to address this issue out of necessity because of the growing disparities that we're seeing across economic lines, across racial lines in this community. And we can't just sort of wait for the state to do something about it or someone else. We have to create the solution. And that will require bringing the best experts in the world on these issues, that most of whom are right in UW-Madison, or many of whom are right in UW-Madison, together with some of the best practitioners in early childhood care services, many of whom are right here in Madison, together with private resources that can fund a program that'll provide services first to those who need them most, and next to the entire city. But in order to do that, you will need leadership that understands how to be resourceful, how to align different resources together to reach an outcome. You need someone a lot like an executive director of a nonprofit organization. And I say that for the laugh, but I also say that because it's true. I do work trying to reach very difficult objectives around pollution and around energy. And what you have to do is take what the world has given you, mold it together, and motivate people to push it forward. That is something that I specialize in. That is what I'd like to apply to this very question that right now, no one's really getting their hands around. But we need to, for our sake.
30-second responses. Go over Satya.
I just want to add another aspect of this issue, and that's the care workers themselves, right? Child care workers aren't paid enough, so it's hard to keep people in the jobs. So we have to figure out a way to make sure that we're compensating care workers so that they can develop their careers and stay in those positions, because that's to the benefit of the children. It's a sticky problem, but we got to make sure that those are good jobs. Toriana, go.
So wrapping up my response, going back to what I was saying, not to give over props to one city. One city actually has a very good model of what's working in our community. And the city of Madison has the ability to give funds to community partners when they write and compete for RFPs,
one of the barriers to community partners who compete for RFPs is that if you're not in that class of people that they deem worthy, you don't get to compete fairly. That's a barrier. Community partners like One City is doing it right, and that's what I would like to see other community partners get funding.
That's right.
Absolutely, there are local practitioners here who are doing wonderful work that we can scale up. It's one of the virtues of living here in Madison with the ecosystem of really good, really smart people working on this issue. I would like to point out, though, that we don't have to wait for new buildings to be constructed in order to get going here. The library system in Madison itself is piloting programs around early childhood care. That might provide a platform to grow, should we just have the courage to take it on.
So the other thing we have to talk about when we talk about early childhood care, and Satya started to get at this, the fact that early providers are not paid enough is a problem in front of us. The fact that it is too expensive to live in this city for most people is another enormous challenge for us. And so as mayor, one of the things that I'm going to prioritize is investing in doubling our city's commitment to the Affordable Housing Fund, and specifically increasing our commitment to what's called workforce affordable housing, because too many ordinary working families can't afford to live in this city.
All right, you all, this is supposed to be a lighter question, but I think it's inducing trauma for me. Because in high school, I was voted least likely to ever come back. What were you all in high school? So in high school, people thought that you were most likely to what when you grew up? Fill in the blank. Mo, go.
My wife was most likely to succeed. I'm married to my high school sweetheart. I was most unique. I get that, and my wife's going to have to laugh at me this evening.
Nick?
Most likely to become a comedian. My girlfriend was valedictorian, though. Charm.
Well, everyone thought that I was going to become an attorney, so.
God, I blacked this part of my life out. I'm most likely to have a kazoo in a political ad.
Do you have a kazoo in a political ad?
I do. You haven't heard it?
I'll check it out.
Yeah, so I went to a public alternative school, and we didn't do the most likelies, but when I was in elementary school, a friend of mine made me a poster that said Satya Conway for first woman president.
Good idea. All right. What policies, practices do you plan to put in place or have already put in place to support mothers? 2 minutes, I'm listening.
It's on me?
Yes.
God. Just skip me on this one. Yeah, go ahead, Toriana.
So I actually worked on the family paid leave policy. I worked on that last year with the HR department. We did a rich equity analysis, and that was one of the analysis that I led last year that most spoke about. I led that racial equity analysis on paid family leave. And that was one of the things that I'm very proud of, because as we all know, that it's a barrier not just to mothers, but it's also a barrier to fathers. It's also a barrier to guardians. Anyone that is adopting a child or having a child and want time off, you want to be able to spend that time with your newborn or adopted child, or if you're getting a kid out of foster care. Those are things that that first connection is very important. And so we spent a lot of time looking at that
and looking at the impacts and the barriers that poses to families or individuals, especially low-income moms and women of color, people of color, because the inequities there are oftentimes go unseen. There's oftentimes retaliation when you're taking time off. To your peers, why is this person not at work? I have to pick up more slack. There's no backups. And oftentimes, dominant culture don't think about those things when you're a single mom. And I am a single mom with 3 kids. This has been my life, all my life. I've never been married. And no one understands that when you are a single mom. And so it's very important. And so the barriers are barriers for everyone, regardless of whether you're married or single, right? There are different barriers that comes to the table when there's a new person in your home. And we wanted to make sure that those things were addressed.
So I happen to think that ensuring there's more affordable housing helps mothers, and ensuring that we have a transit system that helps people get to jobs or to daycare helps mothers, and ensuring that people have clean air and clean water helps mothers, just like it helps all of us. But I would like to see how, in any effort to address early childhood care, we can also deal with a growing issue in our society. More and more single moms are attending college right now. It's a rapidly expanding group of the population of people who are attending college, but very few of those mothers actually get the degree, which means that they're saddled with student debt, don't get any of the economic benefits of the degree, and their families are worse off afterwards. So how can we use any effort around early childhood care to help those mothers who are in college actually get the degree while they do it? And there are a whole host of issues or ways that we can do that. Many of them providing social support and guidance, a little bit like you kind of alluded to, Toriana. Making sure that mothers don't feel alone as they are going through a really difficult journey through college, and making sure that they have support while they are trying to raise a child as they get their education.
One of the things that I most appreciate about my workplace is how supportive we are of parents. I have a colleague who's pregnant right now, and she knows that she's got the flexibility to take the time she needs when she becomes a mom. So I think it starts at the workplace. I think it starts with making sure that women are paid equally in the city of Madison, which, by the way, is not true right now, and that parents, especially moms, have access to the flexibility they need. But then, yes, affordable, healthy housing, rapid transit that serves 24 hours so that folks can get where they need to go regardless. Access to healthy food that's affordable. Energy efficiency services so that homes are healthy and comfortable. Clean water so you don't have to worry about what's in your well. That's an issue we're struggling with now. We already talked about childcare. And then extra and more, and especially support and programs for Black women to celebrate their motherhood and support their motherhood. And I think that we don't do that in this country, in this community. There are some models in other cities that I think we could learn from. There's one model called Sister Friends, where Black women mentor each other, that I think might be worth exploring. But I think we have to lift up moms, and particularly moms of color, and not just think about them as problems to be solved or things in need of help, but as full human beings that should be celebrated.
I think it was a couple years ago now, as I was working on changing the city's policy to be able to implement paid family leave for our employees, I sat down with the city's it's called WIC, the Women's Initiatives Committee. And I went to the meeting and I was stunned at the feedback that I got. I told them ahead of time that I was coming, and actually one of my colleagues, Alder Hall, came with me, and they said, you know, we've never had an elected official come to one of these meetings. It's the city's Women's Initiatives Committee. That was extremely troubling. And so, you know, I was proud to be able to work with women who were prioritizing an agenda for, as city workers, to advance this, and, you know, we'll advance other initiatives together as well. I already spoke about paid family leave. I think one of the important issues is to be able to acknowledge that, you know, we have started to address some of these issues. At least in my district, we started to address these when we talk about affordable housing. That's been an ongoing initiative in the Allied area, beginning with working with folks to get their credit in order so that they are even in a position to be able to purchase a home. Working with families, mothers who said, you know what we need? We need access to affordable food. And so we put funding in the budget years ago when to provide transportation assistance to food, and then to provide support to try to close the food desert in Allied, which I'm proud that we've now done. Clapping for Luna's grocery store. If you haven't been to Luna's, you should. The other thing we need to acknowledge is that when we talk about supporting mothers in this community, in a community that disproportionately is locking up Black men or locking out women, too many single mothers specifically are becoming evicted because they don't have the support structures that they need at home. They don't have the support, and so we need to continue to invest in eviction prevention services of the city to protect mothers from being evicted.
Toriana, the last time you felt the need to code switch was?
I don't code switch. I'm Toriana all the time. And seriously, I am Toriana all the time. And I think that's what gets me in trouble, because there's an expectation that people within city government want me to assimilate. And I keep telling them I am not going to assimilate. All the time. I am beautifully and wonderfully made. Take me as I am.
I wish I could say I was that authentic all the time, but like I code switch when I'm at home with my sisters and I'm little brother again. When you grow up the way I grew up, you are constantly navigating between different worlds, whether it's your Hindu mother or your Catholic community, or you know, all of the different communities that you have to flow into. And I think that I don't necessarily think about it as code switching. I don't think it's that abrupt for me. I hope not. I do think of it as trying to meet people where they are. And that is something that I try to do all the time. And I hope I do well.
So I can pass really easily for straight. And so I need to regularly come out, hi, I'm a lesbian. And I made a decision a long time ago to not be afraid of what would happen when I did come out. And if you want to know more, you can read Dean's piece on me. But I have tried to not code switch too much in my daily life, but man, heterosexism is real, and it is easy to fall into straight culture. And so I appreciate the queer spaces in this community where I don't have to do that.
So one of the geniuses that we don't talk about in American life enough is how young like children of color have to speak multiple languages in America. And that's just part of it. That's how you get raised. That's how you have to operate in schools. And so we grew up, as a black man in America, I had to grow up speaking at least 2 languages. And that's just, that's just whatever you want to call it at home. And whatever sort of normative American white culture is. And so that's constant. I mean, folks can be aspirational about the idea that you wouldn't have to or you never have to, but that's not what being African American is in America.
Just a round of applause. How many people knew what code switch meant? Because I don't know what it meant. So I'm showing my age. I think I might be the oldest person up there.
No.
I don't know what code switch. I infer that it is me. I'm always me.
Right.
No.
Okay.
So,
30 seconds.
So today, I'm talking to my friend Nick. Nick, this is code switching. So when I talk like this, to the general public, I sound very Euro-American.
White.
Right.
Okay.
Well, there's no such thing as white.
Right.
Euro-American.
Okay.
But when I talk like this, you would think that I sound like Shaniqua, right? I'm stereotyping. Because you European Americans seem to think that I have a lot of attitude in my deflection when I talk. So, do you get it?
I get it. I don't code switch. I'm a comedian. I'm looking at it as that. Am I the same person on stage as I am off stage? Yes.
Last question, you all.
All right.
Nick, we'll talk more about this afterwards. All right. So how do you plan to pay for the initiatives proposed? 2 minutes. Where are we? This is Raj.
The same way we pay for things now. We have property taxes, we have fees that we levy for certain services. What I would like to do is refocus how we're spending our money and make sure and how we're spending our energy at the city and prioritize things like transit over hotels downtown, or things like affordable housing over other priorities that we've had in this community. Priority setting is something that is the whole point of this role, that is the whole point of government, period. It's looking at our needs and making difficult decisions around what we have to do based on the needs that are presenting themselves. I don't see a need for a rapid expansion in our funding. I would love a rapid expansion I don't necessarily think the things that we need to do are going to necessarily require a lot more funding, with one exception, and that's early childhood care services. We don't have the funds at the city alone to do that work. We will have to find private resources in order to augment what we can put forward ourselves in order to make that work very well. I'm very good at raising money. I do it for a living, and a man should do it pretty well for this campaign, and I want to do it for that purpose for the city of Madison.
So this is our last question before we open it up for very small questions from the audience. So, sneaky count candidates. All right, next.
All right, let's make it count. All right, we got to make sure that commercial properties are paying their fair share, so it doesn't all fall on residential. We got to be efficient in our use of money and in our the way that we do government. We got to set priorities, and the city really tries, I think, to be all things to all people right now. And we, I think, have to accept as a community that we're not doing any of those things in a stellar way necessarily, so we got to set some priorities and make some decisions about what we're going to focus on. We need to stop doing stupid things like Judge Doyle Square. And we need to partner with the county and private philanthropy in this community to make sure that we're aligning how we spend our dollars. And that doesn't mean that we spend them all in the same place, or that we don't overlap. It just means that we have the conversation about being more organized. And that conversation has started, which is great, but we need to continue it. And then we need to leverage the city's power to get the outcomes that we want. So for example, when we are approving new developments or when we're offering TIP money, we need to be asking for the things that make our community better, like energy efficiency, like green stormwater management, like accommodations for people who don't drive everywhere, and so that we are getting the private sector through the development process to build the kind of community that we want to live in, so the city doesn't have to spend money on that. There's a lot of ways that I think we can leverage the city's power that don't mean a direct handout of money, and we need to be using all of those so that we can make it possible for folks to stay in this community. Part of affordability is being able to afford your property taxes. So we got to make sure that we're paying attention to that at the same time. And if I have a few more seconds, let me just say now, I know we got a few more questions, but you're not going to let us do closing statements. So I just want to say thank you all for coming tonight. I really appreciate you being here.
So the city has a way about itself where every year we get ready to set a budget, and the current practice is that the mayor sends an email to city staff and essentially says, show me a budget that has 1% change or something like that. And so we approach budgeting in the same old way and have for a long time. In the past several years, one of the things, when I was on the finance committee, one of the things that I started working with the finance department on is that, how can we move to something that they were asking for, frankly, how can we move to outcome-based budgeting, where we can start setting top-line goals for our community and every year setting a budget that reflects our top-line goals, asking every department to align their work, their mission, with achieving some big goals around equity, around sustainability, around strong neighborhoods, safe community, whatever we might set those as collectively. As mayor, I'll work with you to set those big goals for our community. As an alder a few years ago, I actually tried to implement this, introduced a resolution to call for returning more power on the budgeting process to our residents directly through something called participatory budgeting, where rather than just having city officials make all the decisions about the budget, we could move to a position where we're identifying a certain allocation of funds and say, no, we want the community to directly inform these priorities and how we're going to spend, some hundreds of thousands or millions of dollars. That commitment to listening, to hearing from you, from taking direction, is what I bring to this. And likewise, as someone who has been a leader in the public sector, a leader in the private sector, and a leader in the education community, when I put forward initiatives that combine all three of those, I'm looking for ways that we can fund all three of those. I can talk more about
that. I did the math, you can check it because I made it in sociology, so it may not be right, but I think it's like 60 million that is spent on police in Madison. I think there's a reallocation of funds that could be done, a demilitarizing of the police. I don't really think we need an MRAP vehicle here. And take some of that money and put it towards where it needs to go.
So there are several different things that I would do as mayor when I'm mayor. We actually did participatory budgeting. That was my very first assignment when I was made equity coordinator in Madison. I actually had the assignment of contacting all of our community partners around the city, went around the city, met with different individuals throughout the city, took our participatory budget process out to the community, did PowerPoint presentations on what participatory budget would look like, in the thoughts that we would move, as we are doing now, to outcome-based budgeting in partnership with our equitable workforce plan, which every department has the responsibility of goal setting. Last year was the first year in 2018 that each department, which we are going to do, and which under my leadership we will continue to do,
with outcome-based budget. Goal set, all of our departments who had capital budgets for the first time had to use a racial equity analysis in their capital budget and scope for high priority. What I would do is, what we're continuing to do, is move from siloed budgeting into service models. Health and wellness, how do we do service? Like what what you just said, why would we have certain types of things in the police department? We moved to areas where we have service type models, and so we have several models, like 6 areas that we would move from silo-based to service models that makes more sense, where we go from cross-functional areas. We provide service in certain areas for public safety. So the departments who cover public safety, you would cover public safety. For the departments who needs to address trauma-informed care, you address trauma-informed care. For the departments who cover transportation issues, you cover transportation and fleet pickup. Things are like those are the areas. Those are the things that I would do to bring down costs and your taxes that you pay that makes your property taxes go up.
So Satya and Raj.
I want to say that I see that stack of questions there, and it's pretty big, so if we don't get to all of them tonight, I'm happy to stay here and answer any of your questions that don't get asked in the forum. I'll be here to answer them if you want to ask them. And I want to say thanks to Eric and Sed and the good doctor for making this happen, and to YGB and the Movement Fund for putting it together.
Thank you.
I just wanted to say that there are 2 candidates in this race that are actually tasked as a matter of their job with developing a budget, raising the resources to meet that budget, and making sure the budget is balanced at the end of the year. That's Paul Soglin and that's myself. I'm one of 2 people with executive responsibilities in this race. And I just want to say that outcome-based budgeting, in my organization, we call it budgeting. You set a goal and you meet your goals. I appreciate that this might have been a change at the city. This is like a common sense way of doing budgeting that has existed in the private sector, certainly in my world, for a long time.
Yes.
So I have been a director of several organizations in my lifetime, so ditto. The city of Madison, and also with the state, but with the Wisconsin Law Foundation and with other organizations. So, and as I said, I work for Forward Corporation, where I actually started an emergency assistance program from the ground up. So I've managed $1 million budgets and cast direction and visions. So, ditto.
Well, look like you got some thoughts.
So in my day job, I'm vice president of a global software company, and we talk about helping organizations transition from an old style of doing business to a new style of doing business. That's literally what I do, is help organizations move to 21st century style decision making in order to save money, in order to be more efficient, in order to compete. When we think about the ways that we are going to be more creative about solving problems and investing in things. When I talked earlier about being a city that will have child savings accounts for everyone, I'm talking about a partnership that I've already laid the groundwork for. The private sector will fund that. That won't be funded by tax dollars, and the school district's already supportive of it. So that's the sort of collaborative leadership that I'm talking about.
So we want to thank you for attending the People's Mayoral Forum. You all are the most well-behaved, quietest group of people I've ever in life sat in front of. So please join the movement at movementfund.com, and don't forget to vote February 19th. Satya has already taken my lines for this. For candidates who can stay, we'll have time to just we'll have time for just a few questions from the audience. And I'm thinking 2 questions from the audience. And whoever needs to leave, transition, stay.
Hurry up and get out.
All right.
Can you respond to the elephant in the room? Where's Mayor Soglin?
Yep.
Where's Mayor Satya?
Mayor Soglin had a scheduling conflict for tonight.
Thank you. Okay. Just answered this one. What is your recommended solution regarding the current challenges with the permanent supportive housing units on Tree Lane? What went wrong?
How much time?
1 minute.
I'll start on this. So what we've seen here is a real disappointment in terms of leadership. I think the initiative that was put forward in the first place, that we should invest more in security, really belied a lack of understanding of the challenge that exists not only for the surrounding community, but for the community that lives in this place. In order for us to get housing first correct, and in order for us to actually live up to our values as a progressive city, any investment into security, and as someone who has spent time in Tree Lane talking to folks who actually live there, there's some areas where folks have a willingness towards security. Any investment in security has to be met with so much more support services, specifically support services for youth. This is a facility that has nearly 100 young people living in it, and there's no youth-specific programming. On the council, I will only vote for funding if it includes funding for support services. And as mayor, that'll be my commitment. That'll be the first way that we approach issues like this.
Regarding the Tree Lane apartments and the families that were put into that apartment, first of all, we created a ghetto. We created projects, and projects went out in the 80s. So that's problem number one. Housing First is a wonderful model. If it was done in advance with all of the proper things that needed to go into that structure first with families. So that was the first failing. You do not put that many people in any structure with that many issues up first of all. That was the first mistake. Madison has Section 42 properties all over the city. If anyone was planning properly, they would not have put all of those families with that many issues and that many trauma in one place. So wraparound services should have been employed with real qualified supporters, and it should not have been in one place creating a ghetto. I'm sorry.
Yep.
Absolutely agree with Toriana. The Tree Lane and Radke, I think you could lump together in this. I think they weren't scaled properly and they weren't supported properly. So if we are going to do this again and we have plans on the south side, we need to revisit how we scale these projects appropriately, making sure that people who are there aren't in a concentration that are going to create immediate spikes in the number of police calls. And I mean, real distress amongst the people that are living there, but also in the surrounding community. And this is really important, because if we do not do this right, other communities will not let this happen again. It is absolutely important that we learn from our mistakes on the south side, scale the project appropriately, and insulate the surrounding community, and provide better services to the folks that are living there.
I mean, the basic question here is it better for people to be housed or to be living on the street? And I'm sorry, but I think it's better for people to be housed. So yes, housing first. And yes, we should get the model right. But there are too many families in our community that are sleeping outside tonight. So yeah, there's been problems, and yeah, people are uncomfortable, and yes, there's been violence. But there are more families in housing because of that project. And that's the baseline for me. So yes, we need to make sure that the people who are providing the services are connected and know the community and understand what's available. And yes, we need to work with the neighborhood in advance of putting in anything like this and make sure that people understand what's coming and try and get them to be empathetic. And yes, we need to provide trauma-informed services. And yes, people need to be trained in the Housing First model, but people need to be housed.
All right, so everybody, no responses, nobody? We good? All right. Here's a question I don't think we've touched on tonight. It's a question of healthcare. Can we talk about healthcare? I realize that healthcare is a state and federal issue, but do you think there is anything the city can do for people without healthcare coverage?
So one of the things we know is that people oftentimes lose their health care coverage when they change jobs or when they change their sort of status. And so one of the things that I've been researching for some time, talking to federal legislators on and trying to start talking to state legislators on is as mayor, I want Madison to be the first city in Wisconsin to offer portable benefits so that when you change your job, you can bring your benefits with you. We know that changing a job is increasingly common in today's economy, but we also know that that's one of the most traumatic financial experiences for people, and just sort of reevaluating, oh my goodness, do I actually have coverage for the things that I'm used to having coverage for? That there are a few communities in the nation that are doing this, and when I'm mayor and maybe have the support at the state level to be able to do this, this is an opportunity to really put our city on the map as a place that you would want to stay, you would want to keep living, even if it meant working remotely. This provides a health and financial stability.
So, more than half of my professional experience have been in human resource management with the state of Wisconsin. And a large part of that experience has been in benefit management, recruitment, labor relations for more than 25 years. So about the majority of the time that I've been here in the state of Wisconsin, and I sat at the table at the state legislature bargaining benefits. It's not the easiest thing to do. So that is an uphill challenge and a battle, and that's where a big chunk of employee salaries go to, which is benefits and how we pay for them. And now that we do not have, and as you all know, that now that Act 10 is in place, we have Evers in office. Those are one of the things that if we were able to do that is a huge benefit that comes out in the Wisconsin retirement system. It is easy to say that yes, you could do that, but as mayor, that was something that I was able to do. It is not the easiest thing to do because it costs money, and it's something that you have to bargain for, and it is something that is very expensive. I can speak firsthand to that, because it's something that I actually done at the table, not something that I don't have. I have experience doing it. It's expensive.
So I would like to be able to snap my fingers and create a Medicare for all, a universal healthcare system. We can't do that at the city level. But there are models of services that are done in our libraries themselves. We spoke a little bit about this earlier. There are birth to 3 services offered in the Petty Library. And it's an innovative partnership with local providers that started a program and used the library as a platform for delivering those services. How can we extend that program to serve others who are without coverage perhaps, but who could use a trip to the library coupled with a trip to talk to a nurse or a doctor about basic coverage or basic health care needs?
I think there's 3 things. I think one is helping people connect to the options that exist out there already from the state and federal government. And so a facilitative role that the city could play. Second is working with the county through public health and expanding what services are available, like just basic healthcare, dental services that are available in clinics or in libraries or in schools. So what free care can be provided or reduced cost care. And then the third thing is to advocate at the state and federal level for whatever you want to call it, Medicare for all, single payer, a better healthcare system.
Okay, you all, we have enough time. Did everyone respond? Okay, we have enough time for 2 more questions for library and South. So I'm trying to vet these. So if your questions have not been answered, it's not because they haven't been raised, because I'm trying to get ones that are so different from what we've discussed tonight. So please bear with me on that. So housing prices in Madison, along with rental costs, are skyrocketing. What will you do to address this issue so that Madison is a place where all people can afford to live? So I'm going to ask again. Housing prices in Madison, along with rental costs, are skyrocketing. What will you do to address this issue so that Madison is a place where all people can afford to live?
All right, I'm going to talk fast. So we need to expand the use of the Affordable Housing Trust Fund so that we can use it to preserve existing affordable housing and make sure that it's safe and healthy. We need to be able to use the trust fund to acquire land for affordable housing, particularly around transit lines, so that you can oriented development. We should be looking at continuing to get tax credit properties developed, but also because that money is just going to the developers, how do we subsidize things that keep the money in the community and with people, like cooperatives, like land trusts, like co-housing, and expand the use of those more creative options in our city. And then how do we think about programs that help folks on the other end of things, lower fixed income folks who own a home. We can't do tax credits for property taxes, but we could try and save money on other things like energy and water and transportation for fixed income folks.
1 minute, Mo.
Thanks, I was wondering how much. So, 1 minute to solve affordable housing. So 3 things. One, increase the city's affordable housing fund. I talked about doubling that and increasing our commitment to housing specifically for folks who are working class. 2, make the process of development more predictable. The process, when a developer is proposing something that is consistent with our community's values, it's to our benefit for that process to be a predictable one, for them to be able to get the approvals, because otherwise, when that process goes on and on and on, they rack up costs and they pass those costs to us. They don't just eat that, right? That ends up making housing more affordable in our community. And third, I've actually already started having conversations. You read in the paper sometimes about places like Microsoft or Facebook investing in housing. I started having conversations with some private sector leaders about what it would take for them to be able to set aside funding for more low-interest loans for affordable housing.
I live in the town of Madison, so I'm still dealing with that. But I am interested in what is going to happen in 2023 when the town of Madison is annexed into the city of Madison, what that's going to do to rental costs in those areas, which I haven't gotten an answer on yet.
So one of the things that I've been consistently saying is, first of all, we need to start with people's ability to pay rent. And we really need to focus on looking at the 15-hour wage that everyone keeps saying is where we need to start. That is not a good living wage in the city of Madison. That's a wage for teenagers. And so individuals need to really start looking at and partnering with wages that are $20 to $22 an hour. That's somewhat of an affordable wage in the city of Madison. One of the other things that I would look at is if we're going to start talking about TIP funding and what that is and the RFP process up front, we need to hold our developers to what they say, and not just to what they say, but actually hold them from beginning to end, and what in writing to how they're going to rent to our low-income and working class renters in this community so that they can be housed and not end up homeless. If you're gonna say you're gonna rent 33 to low-income housing, then you rent 33% to that number, middle income and market rate. Hold them to what they say they're gonna do when they get our money.
This is an issue that every urban center in the country, probably in the world, is dealing with, affordable housing. People want to live in places like Madison with amenities nearby, with conveniences nearby, and that creates some challenges around pricing. I have yet to see an example of a community that has gotten control somewhat of housing prices that didn't include increasing the supply of housing dramatically, doing everything we can to increase the supply of housing. One of the things that the Obama administration recommended, when just as he was leaving office, to cities all over the country, was to modernize our zoning codes and eliminate any vestiges of exclusionary zoning practices. In Minneapolis, that meant eliminating single-family zoning. In Grand Rapids, it was a different model. In Palo Alto, they're considering density minimum so that any new development includes 2 units or 3 units. There are different solutions appropriate for different places. Madison needs to find the solution appropriate to our community with community input.
All right, Shukla, I gave you the wrong information. That was the last question. But if I had more time, I would have posed this question. I was saving probably the most provocative question for last. I will pose this, but you all cannot answer it. You have to answer it for us on Facebook or somewhere. How far will you go to right an injustice?
I can't answer that one.
I mean, I'm turning the mic off as the moderator. Y'all do what